Good morning, church. Welcome to Sunday and time for the sermon. So I'm going to have us do a little bit of thinking at the beginning of what it would be like to have been back in the day. So I wanted you to take a journey with me back to Galilee in the hot sun in the first century. You are a disciple of Jesus. You travel with him wherever he goes, and it seems he goes everywhere. He won't stop going from lakeshore to city, teaching, challenging, healing, performing exorcisms. The journeys are tiring for you. It is long. The days are weary, your feet ache. Ever since he called you from your fishing boat, you have been surrounded by crowds. Now you like people, it's true, but sometimes you can't even walk down the street. It can become suffocating, exhausting. You know it is taking its toll on Jesus. More and more he is going off to pray or for a time of quiet. The crowds are not just trying to walk with him, they seem to scream at him, crying out for healing and hope. He has such patience with them, but yours is wearing thin. You worry about his safety and try to keep him back from the people. You remember, though, that this is how it went with the other disciples, though. He did not listen to the call when they said, "Keep the children away." He said no. He was not happy with them. So you resist, even though you wish to pull Jesus back. You watch as they scream and beg. Earlier today, you saw him cure a demon called Legion, and you know he must be exhausted. The energy of that exchange was great. Yet the minute you leave your boat, crowds converge around you. One man is dressed a little differently, though. This man is more formal, in temple attire. As he draws close, you become more curious than overwhelmed. You realize it's Jairus, one of the leaders of the synagogue. You let him get closer to Jesus, hoping maybe some of this might shift what's going on, hoping that maybe he could get Jesus away from people. But then you actually look at him. You look and see that Jairus seems to be broken, struggling. There are new lines around his eyes, and his hair looks ruffled, as if his hands had kept going, pushing it back and forth. He looks haunted, you decide. His face is withdrawn. He falls at the feet of Jesus and begs him to come to his house immediately. And then you hear that his daughter is dying. He lets you know that, and Jesus know that they must move quickly because there is not much time. Jesus looks at him, and Jairus says to him, "Come and lay your hands on her, so that she may be made well and live." Jesus nods and helps him up, for Jairus had fallen to his feet before Jesus. Jesus begins walking, and the crowds grow as people wonder what Jesus and Jairus are doing together. The temple and the Christ walking in the same direction. They press in further, making it hard for you to even move. By now, Jesus is walking quickly, and you hope that you might make it to the girl in time. You fear, though, that there are too many in your pathway, when all of the sudden Jesus, Jairus himself, stops walking. You almost have to collide with the person in front of you to regain your balance. Jesus looks around him, as if wondering, as if looking for a particular person in the crowd. He calls out, "Who touched me?" But no one steps up. Peter and other disciples say, "Master, the crowd surrounds you and press in on you." Others say, "Jesus, it's just a lot of people, right?" You yourself know there are people pushing at you, grabbing at you to get closer to him. It could have been anybody. But Jesus shakes his head, not accepting those answers. He knows that someone touched him. He says that the power has been drawn out of him. He stands strong. He is not moving. Has he forgotten? Has he forgotten that we must hurry for the girl is dying? What is he doing? Then, a woman in ragged clothing steps forward, trembling in fear. She falls down before him. Who is this, you wonder? This woman tells them that she touched him. She says, I thought if only I could touch your cloak, I would be made well. She says this quietly, as one whose voice is not often heard. But she also says it with a level of confidence, knowing it to be true. The crowds around her scorn her, move away from her, create a space around her so that her disease, her uncleanness doesn't spread to them. She puts her head down. Jesus walks to her, lifting her face gently. And he says to her, Daughter, your faith has made you well. As he is holding her face, there is a commotion as the people come running and crying. From a distance, they run right, not to Jesus, but to Jairus and say, Your daughter is dead. They shout this, and the crowd ruffles from the response. Some begin to look at the woman in scorn, blaming her for the action. Jairus himself, though, seems to collapse. The other disciples turn to him and says, Well, then why trouble the teacher any further? They try to move Jesus away, knowing he is tired already. But you don't know what to do. But Jesus looks at Jairus and says to him, Do not fear, only believe. He tells the crowds to stay here. It only takes a few of us with him. We enter Jairus' house, and there are people screaming and crying. Grief hangs upon the home. Some temple mourners were even paid to cry, as was custom and practice back in the day. It is clear there are loved ones, though, as well. Jesus walks in and lifts his hands in silence, saying, Why do you weep? The child is not dead, but sleeping. Those there laugh at him in earnest, others in hysteria, others are broken by the implication. Jesus has them leave. Only the family and a few disciples are to remain. You're not one of them. So you leave the house. You wonder what's happening inside. But then, to your amazement, not much longer, the girl walks out in a daze. She's laughing and smiling and goes to hang out with other children. People are shocked and awed. You're not sure you've been amazed as much since you first left your boat to stand by Jesus' side. Hi to you who are on here today. What would you think to be one of those disciples? The events in Jesus' life and the lives of the disciples are such powerful stories, and this is one of my favorites. It always has been. In fact, it's my favorite healing of all. I just love this tale. We're here in Mark 5, where we find it. You also find it in Matthew and Luke. And I'm not just saying I love it. I really do love it. It was my ordination choice for Bible study. It's such a rich narrative. It's an interwoven tale. In fact, it's what we call intercalculation. It's a technique used to insert one narrative inside another to imply similarities. Think of them as almost double helixes of a DNA strand. Intertwined, parallel stories. 2 healings, 1 tale. One is a woman who's been bleeding for 12 years. And one is a girl who is 12 years old. The woman has been sick the entire time the girl has been alive. Numbers are important in the Bible, and 12 is an important number. It means complete. If you're just coming in now and you missed the beginning of it, I invite you at the end of this to watch the beginning of this sermon as I tell you the tale. Because I think you need to see how these numbers twist into themselves. But what does 12 mean in the Bible? 12 means complete. 12 tribes, 12 disciples, 12 basketfuls left after the feeding of the thousands. The 12 that continues to show up in Revelation over and over. You see, this is a notion of complete. What does it mean in this healing story for it to be complete? Now, some of you are thinking, the girl was only 12. She seems very young. But remember, we think Mary, the mother of Jesus, was probably 12 or 13 when she gave birth to Jesus. So 12 was aging into adulthood. The woman is an outsider. Her bleeding would have meant that she wasn't allowed in the temple. She was not seen as clean. She was not accepted. She was denied her accepted religion. She was probably poor because unclean people were not allowed to work among others. Even their family was often listed as unclean. So families as a whole were pushed into the street when this label was placed. She couldn't hold a steady job. She was a nobody in the eyes of the community. But on the other hand, the girl was a somebody. This little girl, the daughter that the Gospel of Luke will say was his only daughter, is the daughter of a leader of a synagogue, Jairus' daughter, a powerful man. This girl had clout in the community. They are extreme opposites. Now, Jesus will call the unclean woman daughter as well. For him, all of them are his children, God's children. You can't get much more of a powerful father than that, can you? Note, neither the woman nor the girl are actually named in any of our versions. Actually, the story in Mark and Luke will name the father Jairus, but Matthew won't even give the father's name, just a synagogue leader. The women have no name and are voiceless. The girl might have had a voice in the community, but because she is asleep or dead or waiting, she has no voice in the story. The woman never had a voice in the community as one unclean. Yet, Jesus reverses this. For in our story today, it is the woman who is able to speak out loud in public. No one, it says, cared for her pain anymore, for her sorrow, for no one could heal her. While the girl has all the people were wailing and mourning for her listed among her tale. Jesus tells them to stop wailing. The first woman is healed in public, while the second, the girl, is healed in the privacy of her own home. 2 stories, 1 moment. The 2 stories are really about the role reversals that Jesus creates in the world, about how society doesn't really know what God wants. God wants healing and wholeness for all people, those young and old, those outsiders and insiders. Jesus doesn't deny people based on any criteria that we create. To God, all are worthy of healing. To God, all are worthy of being the daughters of God. These 2 stories, 1 moment in Jesus' life, we see the fullness of all creation. The realities of life and loss. The realities of hope and doubt. The realities of fear realized and grief overwhelming. Everyone has pain, friends. There's no class distinction on this. Money and prestige will not keep someone from passing into the dark night. But Jesus reminds us that is not the end either. That God has control over that as well. The woman is a grieving of her own on this planet. And there are many that face that same reality, to grieve even while alive. Jairus' grief is quick. The woman has been grieving for 12 years. There's another parallel here about the power of God's healing. Those in pain both know that Jesus has power. The woman who is bleeding just reaches forward to touch his cloak, hoping that will be enough. Then Jairus actually jeopardizes his position in the synagogue by coming and kneeling before Jesus, falling at the feet, In Mark, we will hear that the woman will also fall at the feet after Jesus calls her ahead. You see the similarities, but there's one that really stands out. To me, this is a story most of all about courageous faith, about doing anything to be healed and knowing that God will be the one to heal you. The woman and Jairus themselves both possess a great faith in God and in Jesus Christ. Faith in Jesus and his miracles. They both trust that Jesus will help them. Now, yes, the woman had tried many medicines. She had tried everything she could. And Jairus is clearly waiting right to the end. But in the end, they both know that it's Jesus who is the ultimate healer. They both seek one more chance. The woman seeking his cloak, Jairus laying his hands at the feet of the Lord, knowing that only the touch of a master will be enough. Faith is the key to unlocking the meaning of these two stories. You see, Jairus hadn't planned on these healings. I don't think he did. I think he hoped that she would be fine. Jesus himself, I often wonder if he knew this was going to happen, if he placed himself in just the right place for these two tales to intertwine. Jesus is quick like that. But it doesn't seem that way to the disciples. I began you the way I did, with a story narrative, because I wanted you to see what it would have been like to be one of these disciples, to walk along with Jesus as the crowds press in, wondering where you're going and what's happening. But then all of a sudden, this encounter occurs, one after another. Faith dictated the agenda of the day. Jesus is walking along. He's finished the exorcism and he must be tired. But he sees Jairus and he has compassion. He sees the woman and he has compassion. Jairus himself comes to Jesus not a servant. Think about that, right? He could have sent anybody, but he could have sent a family member even. But at the last moments of his daughter's life, he sends himself. Not giving up, but trusting there's another way. Both Jairus and the bleeding woman don't lose hope. They don't give up. They keep trying. Right now in our world, it's sometimes hard to keep trying, to keep having faith, to keep holding on. We might end up sounding like the wailing people giving up. I hear that in the news. I hear that in others. But friends, I want you to be like Jairus and the bleeding woman, to not give up. When things seem tough, to hold on, to trust, to kneel at the feet of Jesus. Jairus could have lost his standing in the community. His standing didn't mean anything to Jesus. It's not that makes Jesus say, okay, I'll come with you because you have power. I'll follow you and help you. No, Jesus takes note of the man when he falls at the feet, shifting the balance of power. Jesus is attracted by the faith. It says Jairus pled earnestly. The Lord's not looking for wealth and power. He's looking for genuine humility and trust in God's grace. Faith always gets his full and undivided attention. So he stops and changes his course. Because Jairus has conviction that Jesus is the answer. So Jesus is. Jesus is walking along and caught by another of great faith. It's important to realize that the woman actually took a chance too. It wasn't just Jairus taking a chance. The woman should not have been in a crowd. She had the chance to make others unclean, and that could have gotten her in big trouble. In some cases, she could have even been stoned for showing up in such a tight space. An untouchable who had to touch. Now, you wonder, to some degree, what Jairus felt about this woman coming forward. Here he is rushing Jesus. He got Jesus' attention. He wants to rush him to his daughter. And then they stop for a nobody. Jairus would have known she was not allowed in the temple. She was untouchable. And yet Jesus uses this moment to teach us about healing. He wants them and us to know that everyone is worthy of his time, that everyone is worthy of wholeness and healing. Jesus does not discriminate. Sorry, let me say that again. Jesus does not discriminate. Everyone deserves his time. 12 years ago, Jairus rejoiced at the birth of his daughter. That same year, 12 years ago, a healthy woman got very, very sick. For 12 years, one grew up while another grew weary. I know that down the road, 2020 will also be a year that defines our world in parallel stories. People are getting very sick. People are starting their grieving process. Neighbors are losing their homes to fire and floods, while across town, properties are left untouched. Lifelong friends who grew up close together have very different perceptions on authority based on the colors of their skin. One at a table will get COVID-19, damaging their lungs, while the one who sits across from them will not show any signs or may not get it at all. One will vote for Trump, one for Biden, and another may not vote at all. Babies are born this year. Lives are being redefined by 2020. Children will find their story shaped by what happens now. 12 years ago, one was born in light. 12 years ago, one was lost in dark. How do we interact with others with different stories? How do we live with people with different realities? How do we share time and place and understand that that doesn't mean we have the same perceptions? We have the same backstories. This moment in time, in our country, in our world, can be unpacked by the stories, this parallel story in Mark 5. Because we are to be reminded that we could walk the same road, but we don't come with the same journey at the end. Things shape us differently. And having an openness and allowing for the differences, relishing the differences, accepting the differences with the similarities, that's where true life is felt. It's interesting to know how Jesus handles these stories. One, he will heal in public, and another in private. You might wonder why. But I think he did the unclean woman's healing in public, because he knew that for her sake, she needed it to be public. She needed people to say, oh, look, she's well now. He's saying to them, take her back, welcome her back into your community. She's one of you. She is a daughter of yours now, not just mine. But the girl didn't need that. The girl needed to be healed at home in private, so that this moment of illness didn't shape the rest of her story, so that others didn't see her in such pain and only remember that. She had a chance to not be so defined by the moment, while the woman already was defined by her illness. Everywhere Jesus went, he was an example of compassion. Everywhere he traveled, he gave hope. So why do I love this story, this pericope? Why is it one of my favorite moments in the entire Bible? And I hope it becomes yours if you spend enough time with it. I think it's because it's so poetic. Its flow and its twist and its turns and its interconnectedness and its deep, deep compassion is beautiful. And it's life. Aren't there commonalities and similarities among our stories and yet great, vast differences? Doesn't it seem like the people in your world at times understand you completely and other times have no idea what you're talking about? Aren't people truly unique? But it's also more than that. It's a story about the voiceless finding their hope and healing. And how can you not love that? It should make you ask yourself, who are our voiceless now that need healing? How about COVID-19 victims? How about fire victims and flood victims? People that are becoming numbers. People that Jesus would surround himself with, the mass of pain in the world. He would surround himself with it, and yet people never became numbers to him. He invested in relationships. He took the time to begin to ask them, who needs healing? Who touched me? Who else is voiceless right now? How about those with constant pain? We write them off after a while when they can't be helped. We tire of their complaining. And yet Jesus didn't with this woman. He calls her daughter. And what about the daughter? Well, she reminds us of children and the voicelessness they have. Kids often bear the burden of adult decisions. sometimes for good and sometimes for much worse: abuse, neglect, and violence. Are we truly seeing and hearing the victims in our country, in our community right now? Or have they just become awful, increasing numbers of pain and death? Have we become immune to the people and depersonalized our brothers and sisters? The story says don't do that. It says take the time to give them their story back. Amen.